What on earth just happened? Welcome to the World Cup mood board. Jarrod Kimber on 99.94. For those of you who do not remember, Zimbabwe were not in the last World Cup. The reason was because they were suspended for political interference into their cricket board. Considering that never happened when rarely those sorts of things happen when Robert Mugabe's friend ran their cricket. And almost all cricket teams in the world have had some form of government interference at one stage or another. It kind of just felt like the ICC had had enough of dealing with Zimbabwe. It wasn't so much that they were banning them for interference, but just for being constantly annoying at that point. And that isn't the only thing, as we talked about in a previous episode. So much else has gone on with Zimbabwean cricket over the last little time. Brendan Taylor came forward admitting that he'd been involved with match fixing, embarrassing Zimbabwean cricket. And that was also their legend, the big-chested talisman of the 90s, Heath Streak, who was also involved with corruption as well. Their best players have been picked off by cricket nations around the world. And to be honest, why would you want to have played for Zimbabwe over that time? They didn't have any money. They didn't have any organization. They weren't always allowed to even play cricket. It just didn't make any sense. The whole thing just seemed to be collapsing. And it's not even the first time that we've said that about Zimbabwean cricket. It's just been embarrassing for such a long period. And if you're old enough to remember, you'll know it's not always been like this. In 1983, a group of near amateur cricketers, well, certainly most of them were amateurs, beat Australia at that World Cup. In 1992, a chicken farmer named Ed O'Brandis destroyed England in that World Cup. In fact, right through the 90s, they had a really good team. And, the Flowers, Heath Streak, Paul Strang, Brian Strang. There were lots of people with the same surname at one stage. And it all culminated in them making them the World Cup World Cup quarterfinals in 1999, where they played Australia. And they lost that game, but they lost it their way, with Neil Johnson making 100 against Australia with a big red floppy hat, smacking the ball everywhere, right? We've been given moments by Zimbabwean cricket before. But to be honest, it's almost too hard to keep those all in your head when, you're watching Colin de Grandon play for New Zealand and Gary Ballance play for England and, the administrative strife that just keeps going and going, and the problems within the country that aren't even cricket related that sometimes affect the way that, the team is played. I mean, Zimbabwean cricket has been in a constant state of flux, while most cricket fans have just started to completely ignore them as a team. This World Cup, though this one's been different. They were clearly building something perhaps even before Dave Houghton got involved. But hey, Dave Houghton has got involved, and things have certainly changed since then. If you think back to the last World Cup they actually played in, so they were suspended from the previous T20 World Cup. They didn't qualify for the previous ODI World Cup. But in 2016, they did make it through to the second level. It's just that they haven't played in one since then. But it does feel like something has been building within it, whether it is Dave Houghton or Sikandar Raza suddenly pressing turbo every time he plays, or whatever it may be, or getting Blessing Muzarambani back from county cricket. All these things have been going in the right direction. And it's so long since we've looked at a Zimbabwean team and been like, okay, things are coming together. And it's also worth looking at their fans, right? Mostly at international grounds, you have cricket fans who support their nation because they love the game of cricket and they happen to be from that country. Most of the Zimbabweans in that crowd at the moment, or a good percentage of them anyway, are not particularly cricket fans at all. They've been following Zimbabwe ever since the warm-up tour, right? All the way around Australia, Townsville to Hobart to Perth. Those three places shouldn't even be in the one country. They're so removed from each other, right? And yet the Zimbabwean fans have been going around. And why? Because they wanted a chance to support their nation. Not even their cricket team, just their nation doing something. And these fans have completely got behind them. And what's incredible is that the players have just backed that up 100% in this tournament so far. They have played really good cricket, pretty much from start to finish. They haven't always been the most rounded team, and there's holes within their lineups, and they're certainly not going to blast through everyone. But there's a lot going on here, and those fans have been given just a weird ride over the last few weeks when it comes to Zimbabwean cricket. And the truth is, if you watch that game and you watch them beat Pakistan off the last ball with a fumble, having to pick it up and everything that came about it, it doesn't really matter if you're from Bulawayo or Harare. If you know anything about the Zimbabwean journey to where we are right now in cricket, this game was special. This side is special. And that match and that team, is special right at the moment. I mean, it was incredible. Anyway, at the halfway point, I actually felt bad because this team hadn't put up the kind of innings that I thought gave them a realistic chance against Pakistan. And with all those tall fast bowlers, this was an ideal place to play their cricket, even if it was also an ideal place for Pakistan to play their cricket. And what we've been saying for quite a while now is, pretty much since the first preview that we did on this World Cup, is that Zimbabwe are really Sikandar Raza or bust when it comes to their batting. He's just been that good. And it's not a bad thing in many ways because, they have Sikandar Raza. It would be worse if they were Sikandar Raza and bust and they didn't have him. But they do have him in the team. And, there's no doubt he just has a huge, huge role to play. If you look at their batting, these are all Zimbabwe's recent games over the last couple of months. I've taken away the South Africa one because obviously it was washed out. But you can see there is a strong correlation between Sikandar Raza making runs and Zimbabwe making runs. Although I now realized I picked red and yellow and then we put Sikandar Raza behind in the shot. But you're going to have to trust me on the ones on the left over here. That's normal that you have a player of his ability that shapes games the way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The bigger problem, there's some big problems though here. The 9 times he hasn't... the 9 times I haven't made over 150, almost all of those are games when he hasn't made any runs, right? So it really is a very bust situation. The other problem is that Sikandar Raza is not a top order player, right? He's a number 4, number 5, maybe even a number 6 in a slightly stronger team. And you don't really want to be that reliant on someone in his position. And then on top of that, he's also their most aggressive batter. So you want him to keep playing with the kind of freedom that has changed his game of recent times. And not only that, but Dave Houghton, as the coach, has recharged this team by giving them more freedom in their Zimball or Hout ball. I haven't worked out which one we're going to go with yet. Theory, though, of playing more attacking cricket. And that's tough to do when there's only one guy who can do that in your side. And you really need him to come off in order to make a big score. It's just a lot of pressure on one guy. And that didn't happen today. And so you just expected Zimbabwe to lose. It just wasn't a lot of runs. And part of the reason that was so sad is because, as I said, they do have a lot of bowlers. And one of those bowlers is also Sikandar Raza, right? That's the ridiculous thing is he's that talented at the moment. And today he knuckleballed the Pakistani middle order out of existence, right? He's a senior player who bowled very ordinary but handy off spin, and he just went off and he worked out how to bowl this knuckleball based on what Sunil Narine was doing. He perfected it, and then he also copied the same technique that Narine had of hiding it behind his back. I think you'll find when he was on his hat trick, both of those balls, I believe, were knuckleballs. They certainly didn't rotate very much. And that sort of tells you a lot. He's just become a whole new player. And yes, Zimbabwe is still a little bit Raza or bust. But today they had Raza and Pakistan bust. Just to talk about Pakistan briefly, the Pakistani openers have been so integral to their batting and so successful at doing it for such a long time. And the worry was, and the worry always is, I talked about it on the previous video, it's that highway system. If everyone keeps using the highway and the highway suddenly has a traffic accident on it, it means that all traffic stops. And that's basically what Pakistan has created. It's not particularly their fault that their 2 top order batters were so good for so long. But it's caused a lot of problems, and you saw the way that Zimbabwe just put pressure on the rest. It wasn't that the rest of the batters weren't particularly good players, but they were under pressure. And again, all they really needed, Pakistan, in this game was probably one of their openers to bat 7 or 8 overs. They probably go on to win this. It's that much of a problem. Now, against India, it wasn't. So it's not gonna spring up all the time, but it's really hard for these players to prepare correctly for those middle order positions when so often they're not batting early on. They're not batting in those kinds of chases. I mean, if this was Pakistan in full form, what Baba and Rizwan get this 15 overs into the game, 16 overs into the game. Or actually a little bit slower maybe. They would have knocked it around a little bit. 18 overs into the game, but they would have done it quite comfortably. The presence of Shah Massood should, at least in theory, give Pakistan a safety net, which is what happened in the previous game. And to be honest, he was probably doing that. But because of the speed that he bats, he doesn't put as much pressure back onto the opposition. And against India, they had Iftikhar come in. And Iftikhar obviously smashed a bunch of runs, allowed Shan to get into the innings. They just didn't have that secondary innings today. In that game against India, they didn't. It was a completely different situation, right? They were setting the runs. It was completely different from that point. But today, I mean, I suppose Shadab was the person who was going to do that, and Shadab and Shan Massood actually put on 52 from 36. If you look at the whole size of this game, that was a pretty big partnership, right? And yet, in the end, when Shadab holed out looking for a second six, it just all kind of collapsed behind him. Pakistan, though, still should have been able to chase 130. So you have to give a lot of pressure, a lot of credit to Zimbabwe. They put so much pressure on them from beginning to the end. And we have been saying all tournament that Zimbabwe's bowlers could deliver them an upset. It wasn't today, the day that I thought that was going to happen, because it was so little runs. I thought they'd at least need 150 or 160 to put pressure on a team like Pakistan. Let's talk about Blessing Muzarambani. He's been excellent all the way through this World Cup, and he was again today. He must have been over the moon to realize that he was finally getting to play in Perth. When you are that tall, it's probably your dream position to play in. And he went at under 4.5 runs an over. And of course he did. Meanwhile, Brad Evans, who came in for his first game in the World Cup, replacing Tendai Chatara, who's been really good himself, whose father once played for Zimbabwe and does seem to have a name so generic that it only would come from a video game without the proper licenses. He bowled really well, especially towards the end there. Got rid of Babar Azam. It was the big last over, right? I thought he was very, very good. He conceded, 7 of the 10 runs that he needed from the first 2 balls. But he still completely kept his head in that sort of situation. And he got out Nawaz, which is obviously the important one in that particular position. In fact, depending on which win predictor you were looking at, when Nawaz, with 3 balls to go, Pakistan's win percentage was at 98%. I don't think it felt like that for any Pakistani in the world. It certainly didn't feel like that for me watching on from where I was. But it was just brilliant effort by the Zimbabwean bowlers. You could go through them all one by one, but I thought they were outstanding. And I thought that he deserved this, because I think if you're watching the smaller games, and a lot of people just tune in when the major games come on, you watch the smaller games and you realize that this is a really, really good cricket team. And they are bringing something together. And I don't know what their top end is. It's probably not getting to the semi-finals of this tournament. It's probably, not becoming a decent test playing nation in the next couple of years, but they have a good bowling attack and they have a varied bowling attack. And it was just, I just thought it was great for everyone. So many people in Zimbabwean cricket I've talked to over the last few years, they're kind of just defeated, right? At a certain point, they know the talent's there and they know the passion is there. It's just getting past everything else. And days like today, I mean, it's hard to be frustrated. It's hard to remember all the bullshit that goes on when you beat Pakistan off the last ball. And when there was just that moment when the keeper fumbled that throw coming in. And I was like, no, they're not going to, and then he takes the bails off. And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a 90s kid and I grew up and I loved that team. I used to try and bowl like Strang. It was just a great moment for world cricket and for Zimbabwe themselves. But there were more games today, so let's not stop there. Let's go over to India's win. In fact, you could say there were two great wins for India today. One happened in Sydney, one happened in Perth. There was a moment, however, 15 overs into India's first innings, where they only had 114 on the board. And it looked, there were a lot of wickets in hand. But, the Dutch, a bit like Zimbabwe, have a very strong seam department, although not a great death unit. And I was thinking, this is where it gets weird for, the top teams, right? This is where a match quickly becomes, a banana skin game. Unfortunately for Pakistan, they got the banana skin game today, and England got it yesterday, and India got away from theirs. But they ended up scoring 65 off the next 5 overs to ensure that there were no bananas for them. You can even go back further. It is interesting looking at India's innings. They were 67 for 1 after the 10 over mark. That's kind of old school Indian T20 cricket, right? That's before Rahul Dravid seemed to come in and tell everyone to whack the ball around a little bit more. And it is something that some teams try against the associates, establish a base score and then trying to up it at the end, rather than lose a bunch of wickets chasing 12 runs and over early on. But it might also be that this tournament is just favouring the bowlers a little bit. And the Dutch team does have a lot of, decent seam bowlers. Van Meekeren's a really good player. He's never quite got to the level where England has come calling, or South Africa, I suppose, or whoever else he could qualify for. But he's a really good bowler, and they've got a lot of, very smart, very disciplined, clever bowlers. But it could also be that this is just becoming more of a anchor-style tournament. And, if you look at it today, if Sharma Soon is not stumped down the leg side again, he probably gets Pakistan home. At the moment, that's what you need. And players like Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma, they are those kinds of players. And so that's perhaps where they went. But let's have a bit of a deeper look here. If you are looking for better signs about Virat's form in general, this is the third time since the start of 2019 where he scored more than 40 in 3 consecutive innings in T20 cricket. I think that seems like it's a really good sign. I'd be pretty happy with that if I was looking for something from him. And so you can also see just from the blue, there's a lot of scores above 40 over the last, 10 or 15 innings or so from him again. So that's quite interesting. And if you look at it, you'll see that in his recent form, you can see his IPL form here on the left. Not particularly good. No one's going to pretend that an average under 25, striking it, not much more than a run a ball is all that handy. You could certainly see how much runs he's made since June, though. So he's making a lot of runs, which is good. And he's upped his strike rate. It's not a huge amount from what he was scoring before, but that's still a bump. And considering this is starting to look like a bit of a low-scoring, tricky World Cup, I don't think that's particularly the worst-case scenario for him. And those games, I should say, this second lot since June, that includes England matches, Asia Cup, matches against Australia, matches against South Africa, and now in this World Cup. So that's a pretty good, a lot of teams to play against. So some of them were lower intensity, perhaps at times, because they were warming up towards the World Cup. But, he's not gone and done it against a bunch of dodgy teams. He's made good runs against good teams. And, that is a really important one. But I can show you all the graphs in the world. How about I just show you a tape to see, so we can just see amongst ourselves if his timing and balance have come back.
Same before. Loves pretty good too early at the start.
Calmly.
Yeah. All right. I think that's pretty fair. I think we could say that Virat's seeing the ball pretty well at the moment. In fact, I won't play it again, but if you would close your eyes and just listen to the noise of the ball off the bat, like Dean Duplessis, the Zimbabwean blind cricket commentator, I think you could still tell Virat Kohli was seeing the ball pretty well there, just by the sounds that came off. The entire world has been looking towards finding more hitters in T20 cricket. And then we rock up to this World Cup in Australia. and suddenly the pitches are quite weird. The seamers are taking over because of that reinforced Kookaburra ball, and the proper batters are finally getting their due. And if this tournament needs someone to stick around, you would think that, Virat Kohli is pretty good. So finally, everything's coming up Virat. Let's move on to Sky. Obviously, most people know now that Sky is a late bloomer, making his international debut at the age of 30. But he's more than making up for lost time. I mean, that's why he got in, right? It's because of the way he attacks. And you could see that from, didn't he hook his first ever international T20 ball for 6? So he's made 250s in his first 3 games as well. And 36 games into his T20 international career, averages just under 40 at a strike rate of 177.5. He's doing all right, isn't he? If you're going to bloom well, I say. Or bloom late, bloom well. I'm not really sure where I was going with that. His T20 World Cup campaign, he's made 51 off 25 balls here. Ended up with the Player of the Match award. While Kohli, until the very end at least, was more than happy to score sedately. Sky basically went at 2 runs a ball all the way through, which is what India want him to do. We got a question last episode where someone was like, do we have to worry about him going out? No, because he has the ability to do this. You want to encourage him to play the way that he does. And especially in a batting lineup where you have Virat and Rohit, you have a little bit more razzle-dazzle, with him. And you have to also accept he's going to fail. So far, his numbers are exceptional, but his batting average will probably come down. But it's the strike rate you want him to keep up with. But he brought up his 50 today with a beautiful 6 off the last ball. And I actually want to talk about that, but also an earlier shot from before. So we'll just play a Sky video that I made earlier. Highlight about Sky, it's this shot, because it's really good. And it's a part of the ground we've all seen him hit. Muku, you might have to play this again with the sound. Too. And so he moves across. The ball's actually... So there's just one thing I want to highlight about Sky. It's this shot, because it's really good. And it's a part of the ground we've all seen him hit a lot of balls to. And so he moves across. The ball's actually a length ball, back for length, just on off stump. And he whips it to where he wants to go. T20 batters do. And Virat's so happy. Look at that loving little cuddle. But I just want to highlight something here on the super slow. You could see that he doesn't quite middle this. It actually comes off a small edge. And then the bat ends up twisting a little bit in his hand. It's not quite as good as it looks on the full speed clip. And the reason I want to bring that up is because in Australia, with the extra pace and the extra bounce, he's probably going to get a few edges that will go for 4 and 6 more often. But there's also a chance that quite a few of those might get caught at fine leg, which we might see for him in this tournament. Logan Van Beek comes around the wicket. He's going for the leg stump Yorker. He gets that wrong. It's put into the crowd. This is a remarkable shot, and then Virat has to show him how to celebrate it as well. To get himself into that position to play that shot with the bowler coming around the wicket and then to make that kind of contact on it, it's just absolutely beautiful batting. So we know he's going to continue to play the same way he always has. It's just that Australia is slightly different. And when he hits them, they're going to go a long way. And when he doesn't, they might go fine and there might be a catcher down there. So, yeah, something worth looking at there. And let's move on to the Dutch team. Obviously, a little bit of a disappointing game for them, all things considered. Although they wouldn't probably... Although, I was going to say they wouldn't have come in expecting an upset, but perhaps in this tournament now, with the amount of underdogs who have won, maybe they would be. They have... it's worth talking about their batting. It's hard to go into full depth because they don't always have their best team available. So their actual team batting figures are a bit skew-iffy sometimes. But Netherlands have 2 project players in their top 3. They have Vikramjit Singh and Bas de Leede. Now, both of these players, they think they will come on very well. Vikramjit is very young. Bas is a little bit older, but a little bit more experienced. But again, this tournament was going to be a stretch for either of them to do more than cameos. And so far, Buzz has done okay, won a couple of Man of the Match awards, more so with the ball, I suppose. And Vikramjit has struggled, right, so far, which is what you kind of expect. Part of the reason that they could make this as something that they were doing is because they did have the ability through their middle order to have so much experience there that if the younger guys didn't come off at the top, then they could actually, get something out of the rest of the lineup. In their middle order, they have Colin Ackerman, Tom Cooper, Scott Edwards, and Rolf van der Merwe. Just on paper, that sounds really, really good. Rolf van der Merwe obviously injured himself against Sri Lanka, and the others, all the other three that I've just mentioned there, have one decent score between them. So it really hasn't worked the way that the Dutch have wanted for their batting. So if you look at this, top run scorer is Max O'Dowd, as he was in the last World Cup. So he's obviously their opener. And if you look, number 2 is Ackerman. He made the majority of his runs in one inning. So he's played, I think, 4 or 5 innings now, but he made his runs in one innings. And that was against Bangladesh in that losing cause. Cooper may be the most disappointing player here. Have a look how far Cooper is down this list. He's sandwiched between the teenage spinner who's on a gap year and Paul van Meekeren, who's quickly becoming one of the most entertaining number 11s at this World Cup, by the way. He might be able to get a promotion. To have a player like Cooper, who is a big bash stalwart, who's a fantastic player, who knows Australian conditions so well, to be this low down, it's just going to be disappointing for them that they haven't been able to get more runs out of it. If you go back up to Ackerman, he averages 40 plus in first-class cricket, but he does struggle a little bit more in T20 cricket, especially for the Netherlands. He's always sort of struggled with them and hasn't produced as much batting as what they would have liked. We don't know if Roloff will play again because of his injury, so that's a concern. And Scott Edwards, he showed some really good, summer form in the Netherlands, playing against really good teams, and sadly hasn't been able to find any of it so far. So, yes, the Netherlands were never expected to win this game, but they still should have beaten Bangladesh. And if they do want to beat a team in this round, then someone is going to score alongside O'Dowd, because I don't think O'Dowd is good enough to beat a side on his own at this level. But disappointing for them today, but pretty comfortable win for India in the end. And just on that, it's a pretty comfortable win for India. But let's just remember, we haven't had that many comfortable wins for underdogs. So I suppose give India their credit. That banana peel was right there in front of them, and they skipped over it in a very graceful way. We're going to have a short ad, and then we'll come back with more of the show.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
We certainly do. And let me continue to speak cricket at you. South Africa beat Bangladesh, and that was largely on the back of Rilee Rossouw's incredible 100. He's been a very good player for a very long time, but he never got the buzz, a little bit like Colin Ingram probably before him. The runs were there, but none of the hype. He isn't particularly a sexy athlete. He's not a big power hitter in that kind of way, although he does have power, and he has no secondary skill. And because of that, he looks like a good lower level, better than replacement level kind of player. But that's not what he is now. He's certainly changed. And if you have a look at what is going on by year, you could see that he's making a little bit more runs over the last couple of years. But he's doing that while his strike rate is going completely through the roof. In the early part of his career, he was a mid-130s striker of the ball. Good, but as I said, not good enough to turn a lot of heads. And in 2019, in the year 2019, it's the first time he scored over 140, with his strike rate. And you can see by 2021, he's up at 150s. And this year, he's been going in the mid-170s at the moment. We're expecting some regression, but even so, that's ridiculous. He's also averaging more than 42 runs and has made over 1,000 of them. Right? He's doing this at volume so far. He's just a completely different beast. And if you have a look, it's basically, a lot of it comes down to how he has been playing spin. He's got a little bit better against pace, but he's been incredible against the turning ball. His strike rate against spin this year on good volume is at 180, and that's not something that anyone ever normally does, outside of like Chris Gale. And to prove that, here he is. These are the best years ever in T20 cricket against spin bowling. You had to score a minimum of 350 runs against spin to get yourself on here. You can see where Rossouw used to be in that sort of back end area. Nothing respectable, but nothing special. To be all the way at the front, not too far from, Chris Gale's great seasons. There's a Kieran Pollard one in there. The New Zealand Axeman Anton Devcic had a really good year at one stage. That's a huge, huge change to go from where he used to be to where he is now. When you do have a look at this, your first thing would be, well, Rilee Rossouw is not the biggest name, so maybe he hasn't done this in the biggest leagues. But you actually go through his numbers. He's made big international scores against India, England, and Bangladesh. He played in the PSL, so one of the strongest leagues in the world. Also the 100, another very strong league. The only lower level that he actually played was in the Blast, and he didn't actually play all that much of it. He's been dominating spin in real leagues against proper international teams, and that's again what he did today. And it was also, of course, the first 100 in the T20 World Cup so far. And if you have a look at how he did compared to his teammates, you can see that he was by far the player that completely took Bangladesh down today. Quinton de Kock and him had a big second wicket partnership. That was the reason that this game went. That was 163 runs from 85 balls, and it was South Africa's highest in any T20 match, and took them to 170 for one before de Kock fell in the 15th over. It was actually, in the end, quite a disappointing death batting period for South Africa. They only added 29 runs, but it didn't matter because, Rossouw had already batted Bangladesh out of the game, which might have been part of the reason why South Africa batted first as well, but I'm not 100% sure on that. It was also, weirdly enough, Rossouw's second consecutive international 100, because he made one in India as well, not that long ago. And no one had ever hit back-to-back T20 100s before this year in international cricket. And Rossouw now becomes the second man to do it. I'm really happy to be able to tell you this, that French cricketer Gustave McEwen got hundreds against Switzerland and Norway in consecutive games earlier this year. A big fan of Gustave McEwen. He's also the youngest man to score a T20 International 100. So, we give you all the great Rilee Rossouw facts, and then, we go to the old Gustave McEwen. There's just so much information you can get on this particular channel. See? It's about everything. But now let's go to Anrich Nortje. Unlike a lot of other young quicks in cricket, Anrich Nortje wasn't particularly fast-tracked. Pardon the pun. He really had to fight to get himself into even his domestic setup, let alone the international team. But that's one of the special things about him. He's a player who's continued to evolve and get better at every level. And he basically took himself from a low-end fast bowler, so maybe more fast medium with the odd fast ball, to perhaps maybe the most consistently quick bowler in the world. Apologies to Mark Wood, perhaps, but those two are the two obvious names. That took work on his action and his fitness, both of which he took to, really strongly. You can actually, there's a podcast that I did with CS about it, which is worth listening if you want to Google that and find out how he actually built himself into the player he is. But he also then went and added movement to the ball. First, when I first saw him play in international cricket, he bowled straighter than Shannon Gabriel. And I mean that in every sense of the word. And then when he got to the white ball cricket, he didn't have a lot of nuance to his game. And then he started adding all these different slow balls. Just one thing after the other. He just keeps, he's got so many slow balls now where most bowlers just have like one variation. He has multiple variations and he's nailing the back of the hand, which is probably the hardest that you can beat. So if you think about Nortje, he was fit and he became super fit, and he was fast and then he became super fast, and he was skillful and then he became super skillful. This man upsells himself better than a McDonald's worker, right? And today we saw all these things come together. So I put together a little video to have a look at Nortje's day against Bangladesh. Look at this, seam up, and it looks like he's going to bowl a straight seam delivery. And then as he comes over, he gets something slightly different. I think it's a wobble ball, but it seems to do even more than that. And then it pitches, it straightens a little bit, and because of the pace and the movement, it takes the underside edge, and he's gone. It moves a long way, though, quite clearly. So you would think it was a slope. No, it's over 90 miles an hour. He's moving the ball at over 90 miles an hour. Right? And we know how quick that is because we have so much other footage of just how quick he was kind of all day, and fast, and, you know, some more fast stuff as well. And that one's so fast that it seems to almost break Quinton de Kock's fingers as well. But now we have the slow ball, completely baffling the batters. In fact, I think this one on its own is worth looking at a little bit more because that is a slow ball at 133 kilometers per hour. I mean, what are you supposed to do when someone is bowling that fast, but a slow? I mean, that's quicker than a lot of people's quicker ball. It's ridiculous. Yeah, you should clap yourself. You're really good. Yeah, I've been a big fan of him for a long time now. That was quite fun to put together as well. On to Bangladesh. Obviously, a disappointing day for them. Apparently, they had all their luck that they needed in that game against the Netherlands. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about Shakib Al Hasan. It's probably not been a tournament that he wants to write home about at the moment. Let me just find my thing. He's actually been in good touch with the bat coming into this tournament. In fact, have I put the right one up? Oh yeah, I have. In fact, he's been... he's had a few ordinary seasons. If you have a look, you know, this year really sticks out, considering there's quite a few ordinary seasons looking back with the bat. So he's really managed to come together quite well. But he has just made 8 runs from 2 games in this in the World Cup so far, right? So even with the year that going as well for him as it has, he hasn't been able to quite bring that across. And today, of course, you know, sort of the worst thing available for him happened. He was giving out LBW to Nortje, and, you know, pretty sure that ball is pitching outside leg stump as well. In the Tri-Series for the World Cup, he could see, so when you look at his bowling, he conceded 91 runs in 3 matches, and he only bowled his full 4 overs once. He didn't take a single wicket, and he hasn't taken a wicket for a while. Against the Netherlands, he did take a wicket against the Netherlands in that other game. He ended up with figures of 1 for 32 from that game, which looked good on paper. But he actually only came on when Netherlands had already collapsed. And even then, he just wasn't as impressive as you would expect someone like him to be. But if you go to the real problem seemed to be against left-handers more of late. He actually, in his career, has been a very good bowler against left-handers, which is why he's been such a very good bowler for Bangladesh, and also, you know, in the IPL when he's been there. But he's just started to struggle a little bit. And of course, today, that was a terrible matchup. He was going up against Rossouw and de Kock. And he was also, they delayed him as long as they could. He didn't come into the attack until the 10th over. And when he did get his chance, it didn't go particularly well. Here's a couple of balls that we've got from that game. So this is him to Rossouw. Oh, well, that one's already in the crowd. It was so bad that the ball started in the crowd. So you can see just the big sweep there. It's an incredible hit from Rossouw as well. And the Virat fan is going to go pick that one up for us. 86 meters. He's bowling around the wicket. He's probably trying to get to the back heel and can't do it. Then he comes over the wicket and changes his mind, sees Rossouw come at him, and you can see he panics. Now, this is a really top-level player. He's probably, you know, numbers-wise, one of the best all-rounders we've ever seen in white ball cricket. That's a big mistake for someone as good as Shakib to make. This over went for 21, and, you know, he ended up getting a couple of wickets later on, but he finished with 2 for 33 from 3 overs. Again, not finishing his spell, which is, it's a little bit of a concern for Bangladesh. If you look at Bangladesh's overall bowling figures here, it's basically everyone at 10 runs and over, and then Mustafiza, who goes at 6.25. Oh, we love the fizz, don't we? It's worth just bringing that up. Just what a magnificent bowler that he is. Still holding up his end, even on one of Bangladesh's worst days. But what a player he is. But let's just go now to our final story of the day, shall we? Which is a good fun one, which is, I'm not going to say it until Munku finds it on the graph for you. Hey, it's Pakistan, Mr. Bean. I mean, forget India and Pakistan and England, Australia, and all the other rivalries. Who else hates each other? Bangladesh and Afghanistan, right? We've got a new great rivalry coming into town. It is Zimbabwe-Pakistan. And this game seemed to have changed in the preparation and the media based on one particular tweet. When Pakistan's social media team put up a tweet going onto the next game, and suddenly there was a tweet that was all about the fact that Zimbabweans won't forgive once you gave us that fraud Pakistan Bean instead of Mr. Bean Rowan. We will settle the matter tomorrow. Just pray the rains will save you. If you don't know what any of that means, and to be honest, when I first saw it, I was like, what on earth is going on here? Pakistan was accused of sending a fake Mr. Bean to the 2016 Harare Agricultural Show. How many other big stories do you think came out of that show? If there were any, I would actually love to know. To add an extra amusing detail, the fake Mr. Bean, his name is apparently Muhammad Asif. Just when you thought that there wasn't enough cricket involved in this controversy already. But also, just a shout out to Pakistan on this. In 2019, they gave us the disappointed fan meme. Me, as a cricket fan, you have no idea how happy I am when I see like Americans and football fans who have no idea about the disappointed Pakistani fan meme, where it came from, and they use it because it's so perfect. So now, here we are. They might be going out of this World Cup early based on what has happened in this particular game and the loss to India. But again, they're still a gift to cricket, or maybe a gift to cricket. I'm not really sure at this point. But in our greatest rivalry, or in our greatest new rivalry in cricket, Zimbabwe won. So, Pakistan, Mr. Bean, your boys took one hell of a beating. All right, we'll have another ad here. And then after the break, I'll take some of your questions.
Mr. Bin, Bin, Bin.
Hello!
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 Hello, Wilson Velvet!
Yeah!
I like your
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
All right, let's get to some of the questions. I've got to actually click on them, don't I? And let me just turn the lights on in here. I didn't expect to be recording it this late, if we're being honest. We were planning to go just after the game, and that was at the halfway point of the innings, and then Pakistan batted. So if this is later than you wanted it to be, blame Pakistan, which I'm sure everyone will be today. Ananda says, in retrospect, Pakistan would regret playing Mohammad Wasim instead of a batter. It's one of those things. I understand what you're saying, but didn't he take 3 or 4 wickets? They shouldn't have needed an extra batter in this particular game to win it. I think they were looking to see what some of the other players in their squad did. I really don't think this is a selection issue. Like, I can understand the question, don't get me wrong. But I don't think that I don't think anyone's looking at this going, the problem was today that Pakistan didn't select their team correctly. They had the players on the field. They had, for 50% of, the first 50% of their game, they were massively in front. you could say they're in front for a good part, especially when Shadab and Shan Masood were batting as well. And so, yeah, I don't think it's a selection issue, if we're being honest. Sudarashan says, how much will this change Zimbabwe cricket? I would love to say a lot, but having covered cricket for a long time, little bits of success quite often aren't followed up. I mean, the best one of recent times is obviously the West Indies one, where they won, back-to-back World Cups. Well, not back-to-back, they missed 2014, but 2012 and 2016 World Cups. And it's hard to see now, looking back on it, what anything was done to improve West Indies cricket from that, other than the fact that, very bad administrators got to claim that they were involved with a team winning, which they had very little to do with. So for me, looking at this, I have my cynical cricket analyst hat on. I think at the very least, it's given Zimbabwe another day in the sun, which is an important thing, because I do think that there's a whole generation of cricket fans that didn't know that Zimbabwe could do this. They didn't grow up in the 80s and 90s. They didn't get to see those teams. And what they've seen is just dribble, shit, terrible stuff, right? And so for them to be able to see what is going on in cricket at that level, I think is a really, really important thing. And I do think that has changed, that will change things. From an administration point of view, and from a culture point of view, I don't know. The only other thing I would add is that clearly Dave Houghton is onto something, and Sikandar Raza is a really good player. And their bowling attack, I mean, me and Barrett did a podcast on their bowling attack, early on. We both want to see them bowl in test matches outside of Zimbabwe. There's something there, right? This wasn't a fluke. They had to create the pressure on Pakistan. Yes, a part of it had to do with Pakistan's openers failing again, and probably that question from before about the batting lineup. All these things play a part. You have to be good enough to put the pressure on them in the first place. All right. There were several times where I thought, well, Pakistan's just going to knock this around and win this easily. It never happened. So those signs are really, really good. And I certainly think that is, so from that perspective, I'm optimistic, but I'm not going to sit here and say that this suddenly fixes all the problems within Zimbabwean cricket, because there's so many problems within Zimbabwean cricket. And it's going to take a long time, I think, for a lot of those to be fixed and brought back. But there's millions of questions in here about Zimbabwe. But I will just try and get to a couple of others about some of the other things. And let's see what else we've got. Sorry, everyone. So many questions. Here we go. Here's a good one. Rahul says, should India try to protect Sky from the early onset of bowlers in the power play? Yes, I think the way that this World Cup is going, and, for those who haven't, especially those who are newer to my channel, who maybe haven't been around that much before, we're pretty sure, almost positive at this stage, that Kookaburra reinforced the seam on the balls, and it means it's a lot harder to bat in the power play than it used to be. The averages have dropped, certainly against seam bowling, all around the world, and look at this World Cup for any more proof if you need it. I do think at this stage, teams now need to, and this might change as the pitches, if the sun comes out and the pitches starting to flatten up around the ground, around the country. But as it currently stands, I think you do have to be a little bit more strategic with what you were doing in terms of who you put up the order. I'm not particularly talking about pinch hitters. So Rahul's question here is really interesting, because Ashwin is a player who might be able to do that as well. But what you really want to do is, I think you want to be in a potential where he. I think you want to put yourself into a potential position where you can maximize that period, hopefully between overs 8 to 20, and someone like Sky is a perfect player like that. What you probably don't want is Sky or Glenn Maxwell, or trying to think of someone from another team in a similar sort of situation. You don't want those sorts of players in the power play as the power play is currently being played. So if you do have the ability, like Australia does with, I don't know, Mitchell Starc or Ashton Agar, or India does with Ashwin, or maybe England does with Sam Curran, whatever those sorts of different, team dynamics were. Well, Netherlands do with Paul van Meekeren, who should go up the order. I think we might see more and more of those sorts of things now. So we might see some very different kinds of tactics than we're used to in T20 cricket games naturally, just because this tournament does seem to be getting played differently as it's going at the moment. But really good question there. Michael says, Akshar wields a long handle. He can be useful at the end. He's better than Ash. Well, he works differently. I picked this question because I think this is really interesting. And I've never got a chance to make a video of it recently. Why I really like their combination, and obviously Jadeja would be really good as well in a different way. But why I really like the Akshar and Ash equation is you probably don't want Akshar to go up the order unless there's a real matchup that is suited to him. But you can send him up the order occasionally. Ash, you will send up the order when there's probably two spinners and the wicket's doing a little bit for them. Or perhaps, as we were talking about before, maybe in the power play to, knock the ball around, get a couple of boundaries, and soak up some pressure. And then with the spin, they also work in two different ways by physically spinning the ball in two different directions, but they're also different kinds of bowlers. One is obviously almost a natural, he's got such an advantage. There's a great video I did with data on Akshar's bowling that just tells you how different he is to every other left-arm finger spinner in the world. And then Ash is obviously in a world of his own, right? I really like that pairing that they come up with, and I think it works all the way through here. I mean, you'd still rather have Jadeja because he's incredible. But yeah. Let's just see what else. Here's a good one. Ajinkya says, I recall the first over of Rabada went for 17 runs against Bangladesh, and then Nortje came on and destroyed them. So Rabada and has, I think he's got a lot of, I'm trying to think of the best way of putting this. Because he took a lot of wickets at the death, which don't get me wrong is an important thing, over a couple of years in the IPL, his numbers were incredible. And I think he probably got more credit than he should have. Nortje, for me, has been the better T20 bowler. Rabada probably, well, I'd love to say Rabada has a higher ceiling, but I'm not sure he does anymore because Nortje just keeps improving. But, on the face of it, Rabada is going to go down as probably one of the great test bowlers of all time. I don't think he's as good at T20 as he could be. And I'm not really sure what he needs to do in order to be a little bit more efficient there. But I think that Nortje, I know we saw him come back against... in the IPL when he wasn't at full fitness, but we know when he was at full fitness, he's incredible. Also, the other thing that I really like about Nortje, which I sort of hinted at in the earlier video, is that he has three slow balls. He has two main slow balls, and he obviously has his pace on ball. So his pace on balls at 150 kilometers, his off cutters at around 128 to 133 kilometers, and his back of the hand slow ball is anywhere between 105 and 115. It's very hard to line up a guy like that consistently when the actual changes of pace are so massive. On top of that, you've got his seam up ball, which he's bowling as this wobble ball thing that I showed in the video, does a little bit. Then you've got his off cutter, which obviously grips a little bit in the pitch, does a little bit of dropping, and then his back of the hand ball goes way down and drops massively. They're all three completely different balls with three different trajectories. He's in that way, he's probably more like a baseball pitcher than he is a bowler in the way that every pitch he has is so different to everything else. I just find him absolutely fascinating, and I have for a long time in that kind of situation. So let's just see what else we've got in here. Sorry, I'm not picking the same people over and over again. It's just that some people are asking very good questions today. Ajinkya says, Bangla really seems to have lost their way to become a great team. Do you think they are dependent on an old Shakib? I think if you go back to the last World Cup, I basically said that. I don't think that they're over-dependent on him because he's a good player and he's doing what he can. I think that they haven't been able to bring up other players of the same kind of level that you would expect. And it's causing massive issues for them. Their T20 cricket, I'll say it again, I did a podcast with Mohammad Issam. Go and find, and Google Red Inker, Mohammad Issam, Jarrod Kimber. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. It's probably on this channel as well. there's a big problem with the way they bat. And I don't know if that's why South Africa batted first today, but once they did, I was like, well, that's kind of over. I set my alarm early, had a look at the score at 200, and I was like, no, Charlie can cover that first game. So it really is a bit of an issue, I think. I think from that perspective. So they're not a very dynamic team. They've got the worst win-loss ratio of any team in this tournament, who's still in this tournament, I should say, over the last, was it 2 or 3 years? And I'll say it again. I thought the Netherlands should have beat them. If Netherlands don't win a game in the second round, they're going to be haunted by that game, because I think they'll really be upset at that. Pranab says, I'd say Zimbabwe has excellent pace bowling, and Raza is clutch all-rounder, is coming good, as opposed to waning Shakib, and both have somewhat crappy batting. Yes, one thing I would say is that Bangladesh would probably kill to have Raza in their batting lineup at the moment. But yeah, they're both fairly ordinary batting sides. I think that's fair to say. I think in T20 cricket, Zimbabwe have this beautiful combination. I talked about this before the tournament of, you've got three... well, now 4, I suppose. I didn't even know that much about Evans, but you've got 3 really good frontline seamers. You then have a wrist spinner and a finger spinner who bowls knuckleballs in your top 6, top 7, depending on where ball bats. The flexibility there. There's there's other part-time spinners at the top. It allows them to play players like, Jongwei and have a specialist wicketkeeper and all that sort of stuff because of what they can do. They're a long way off being a consistently good team at the top level of international cricket. But there's a lot of I always say, if you can have any building blocks, the first thing you want is a really strong bowling a lineup. This is a good bowling lineup for test matches all the way through to T20. The spinners won't be as powerful. These 2 particular spinners won't be as powerful in test match cricket, but the seamers, Blessing will be good anywhere. And Chatara I really like as well. There's a lot to like of this Zimbabwe team as they're coming through. Phil says, looking at Group 1, I remember yesterday I said Group 2. No, sorry. Looking at Group 1, isn't this Group 2, Phil? You've confused me. Group 1 is the crazy one, and now Group 2 is the crazy one, if that narrows it down for anyone. Is it just going to be India and South Africa? Could Zimbabwe sneak in? No, I don't think Zimbabwe could sneak in. I think that probably India and South Africa are pretty safe here. And I'm saying pretty safe with half my throat, because South Africa have already lost half a point. And also, no one had Pakistan losing to Zimbabwe today. No one had Ireland beating England yesterday. So from that perspective, no one's safe in this tournament. But realistically, India should certainly be fairly safe from here on in. And I would assume that South Africa, even losing that point to Zimbabwe, they might be a little bit more iffy. But I'm not sure anyone else can get enough points now to put the kind of pressure on them. I'm trying to remember when Pakistan plays South Africa. So India play South Africa next, don't they? And then it might be South Africa's next game after that is Pakistan. So if South Africa split those 2 games, it could be a big problem. Sorry guys, I'm live. Can you go away, please? Hey?
Hey Google.
Mate, I'm live. You have to shut the door. Sorry about that. There's a problem with one of our devices downstairs. But yeah, I think, look, thank you to everyone. I've actually now got to go record another live. I've got to go over to Spotify Live. For those of you, I know it's not accessible in all cricket playing countries, but I'm going to head over there now and answer some questions as well. So if anyone does have any more questions, it would be great to come over there and ask them. But thank you. If this is your first show and you're just coming on, we are doing these every single day during the World Cup. In fact, if you're like, I don't even know what's happened in the World Cup, we've already got it covered. Just go back and see everything all the way through from the re-qualifying event at the start, all the way through to today. Most of the shows have been anywhere between half an hour and an hour. We'll be doing more and more analysis coming through every particular day. Huge thanks to everyone who's come on, everyone who's commented, everyone who's sharing, who's liking, who's subscribing, who's pressing the bell icon. We have to change the times every day because of the schedule of this tournament is all over the place. So this is a much later one. Usually we do the videos about 2 or 3 hours earlier than we have managed to do today, even 4 hours earlier, actually, on some days. So The best way to follow all this is to like, subscribe, press the bell icon. I don't know. That's what I hear people say on other YouTube channels. It makes sense. But if you want to come over and chat some more, I'll be on the Spotify live app now. You can follow me at Jarrod Kimber, and I will tweet out a link there. Huge thanks to everyone. And more than anything, huge thanks to the Pakistani Mr. Bean. We'll see you next time.